When Namco brought Pac-Man into the third dimension, they transformed an arcade classic into a 3D platformer for the PlayStation, and it worked out pretty well. While it didn't really hold much a candle to the other big-name platforming mascots at the time, it was still a decent game, and even sold more than 1 million copies. It was pretty clear that Pac-Man World needed to be more than just a one-time spin-off. Pac-Man's dabbled in platforming games before, with titles like Pac-Land and Pac-in-Time, but it seemed that Pac-Man World was the home run they've been hoping to hit. After doing so commercially well and being warmly received by fans, it was time for another round of Pac-Man World. Not even 2 years later, they put out Pac-Man World 2 for the PlayStation 2, GameCube, and Xbox. This seems to be the one that most people are familiar with. I even have a lot of friends that grew up playing it, and a big part of the reason for that is probably because it was multi-platform, so more people had the opportunity to grow up with this game, unlike the first game, which was only on PlayStation, and that could be part of the reason why I don't really know that many people who played the first one. Now, like the first game, I've never actually played this one before, at least not very much of it. Maybe the first level like a year ago, but yeah, I'm going in blind once again. But after playing through the first game and seeing all of the neat ideas that game had, I'm very excited to see how they expand upon and polish all of that in the sequel. It's always interesting seeing sequels to 90s platformers on the next gen of consoles. You know, with the better technology, better controls and better game feel are much more within reach. It's an era about polishing what you can do, improving the experience into something much smoother. I was going to play through the PS2 version of the game, but I was able to get a much better picture quality out of the Xbox version, since it supports widescreen and progressive output. And normally I do like to have some sort of consistency within video series like this, you know, playing it all on the same console, but I don't care that much, so why don't we pop this in and get already in there. No shot of me putting in the game this time, because I already did. Dude, that title screen's pretty cool. Pac-Man's playing hacky sack with the logo. That's super great. I really like that. So the story starts out with the 4 ghosts from the original arcade game, Inky, Blinky, Pinky, and Clyde. They're all dicking around Pac-Land at night when they decide to steal the 5 golden fruit from the tree in Pac Village. This ends up releasing a demon who was sealed away by these golden fruit. The demon then tells the 4 ghosts that if they do as he says, hiding the 5 fruit, they can get rid of Pac-Man and his friends once and for all. The next morning, Professor Pac tells Pac-Man the news, explaining how years and years ago, a wizard created the 5 golden fruit in order to seal the demon away. A knight named Sir Pac-a-Lot then used the fruit to imprison the demon in the tree. I never really expected Pac-Man of all things to have lore, but I really like how they handled it. It almost feels like a parody of sorts, which is completely topped off when they announce that the evil demon's name is Spooky. Yeah, Spooky the Evil Demon Lord, man. This is clearly not meant to be taken seriously, you know, like Pac-Man World 1's plot, it's very lighthearted and simple, great for kids. Get the 5 things, beat the bad guy, and save Pac-Land, you know, sometimes it's all you really need for a cartoony platformer plot, you know, and it's different enough from the first game, too, the stakes being much higher this time, you know, instead of saving a birthday party, you're saving Pac-Land, but even still, it falls in line with the same tone that they've been going for so far in the series, so I think it's a great, simple start. The first level is Pac Village, which is just a small open area, you know, kind of like the courtyard from Mario 64, yeah, just like a small little spot to figure out the controls and stuff, so that's cool. Returning from Pac-Man World 1, we've got the ball bounce move, used for attacking enemies, breaking stuff, and getting some extra height to reach higher platforms. And we've also got the Rev, which is still used to attack enemies, getting up steeper slopes, and to launch off of ramps. Though it's actually helpful for attacking this time, because now it's possible to do it without flying off the stage every time, and that is really nice. The camera coming down behind Pac-Man to help you aim really helps out with that. You also have a lot more control after you let loose. Both moves actually feel quite a bit better in this game. The character physics have definitely improved. Pac-Man doesn't have that oddly heavy-ish feel to him anymore. The weight feels a lot more natural in this game. Now moves like bouncing and revving control so much more smoothly, which is an obvious improvement when going from a generation that used analog input sparingly to one that's heavily dependent on real analog controls, but you know, as easy as it is to take for granted, it is an improvement nonetheless, so it's worth noting. And that's actually it for the moveset, just the jump and these 2 returning moves. moves. I mean, there is this kick you can do mid-jump to break crates and stuff, but that's really all there is. The dot throwing move has been removed entirely, which, you know, I think they could have done a little bit more with it. Perhaps letting you aim in first person to hit some switches or do some simple puzzles. I don't know, that kind of stuff seems to be in plenty of other platformers and adventure games from this same era, so I think that would have been fine. But it seems like they'd rather ditch it in favor of focusing just on the moves that get Pac-Man from one spot to another. And that's pretty interesting because usually when there's a sequel to a PS1 or N64 game like this on the following generation of consoles, usually they add quite a bit to the moveset. Mario had a lot more moves to work with in Sunshine, and someone like Jack or Ratchet, they both have way more moves than their developers put in their previous games, Spyro and Crash. But sometimes you don't really need to add a lot of new stuff, just continue working with what you got. Rayman 3 is a game that went this route. They had new power-ups and stuff, yeah, but the core moveset, that was exactly the same as in Rayman 2. They just had the jump, the helicopter, and the projectile attack. That was it. They might have been tweaked to work a little bit differently here and there, but you were still playing with the exact same deck of cards. And I still think Rayman 3 is a solid game, so it can work. The question is, does it work in Pac-Man World 2, though? And, well, you know, I'd like to say so, yeah. They do crank quite a bit more potential out of just these two moves. My favorite's gotta be what they did with the bounce. We've now got these new types of trampolines that give us some serious height, aiming the camera straight down as we dive. Reminds me a lot of those Vine segments from Sonic Adventure 2. It's really satisfying to slam that button down and hurtle all the way down and have yourself launch back up. As for the Rev Move, those platforms you'd use it to charge up are now only in a single level, and there's many less obstacles that actually require using a thing to get by. Just a couple of ramps here and there, nothing much more, but even still, even without those level cues that require the use of this move, I did find myself using it way more than I did in the first Pac-Man World, and that's simply because it's much more reliable for getting around and taking out enemies. There's even a type of enemy that can only be defeated by using the Rev, as if the developers are saying, okay guys, it actually works this time, we promise. Still though, I think they could have used more stage gimmicks that really do take advantage of it. Those are a tad lacking this time, and that's a little bit disappointing, because when you make a move so much more polished and functional, you'd expect them to do more with it, so I don't really know why they didn't. And that's a very disappointing thing, because it's one of the biggest things I look for in a sequel, not just on improving the moveset, but also creating levels that have you utilize the moveset in new ways you did not before. Not to say the game doesn't do that at all though, it does do this with the bounce move, just not the Rev Move, that's all. The same power-ups return too, the power pellet is exactly the same, and we've still got the chrome ball turning Pac-Man into metal. You'll rarely use it for walking underwater, I actually think you only do that in one level. This time it's mostly used for resisting damage from things like fire and buzzsaws, so again, same mechanic, but they're trying something a little bit different with it, so that's cool. And there's one brand new power-up, the Shrink Pellet. Grabbing this will have Pac-Man shrink down to a fraction of his size, allowing him to squeeze into small areas. It's a novel idea, but they only use it in the game like 3 times. Like, come on guys, if you're gonna make up a cool new power-up, you gotta actually use it. The objective in every level is the same as the first game, you simply have to reach the end. Levels are still fairly linear, but the 3D space is used much more extensively. Before, the game was practically a side-scroller with a meter of depth for you to walk around in, but now we've got more levels that play with the camera behind Pac-Man, allowing you to explore a little bit more. That said though, there's not really much to explore. The levels still have that hallway-like fashion to them that games like Crash Bandicoot often sport, but there are alternate pathways and out-of-the-way ledges here and there that will hide switches, mechanisms, and even collectibles. Every stage has several hundred dots and a bunch of fruit to collect. The collectibles work much differently this time. Before, the dots were used to attack or to gain extra lives, and the fruits were used to open doors. Now, in Pac-Man World 2, the fruit and dots only exist for 100% completion. If you get everything in the stage, you get a check mark, but if you don't get everything in the stage, you don't get a check mark. That's really it. The objects themselves don't bear any independent significance this time. Getting 100 dots and 2 cherries will not matter. You either get absolutely everything in the stage, or you may as well not have gotten anything at all. Well, I guess you can open like these chests if you get a fruit, so it's kind of like the door thing, but it's really scarce and doesn't matter that much, and I don't know. I just wish that getting some things in a stage had any significance, because if you don't 100% it on your first go, then there was no point in collecting anything. And this creates some big annoyances I do have with this game, but I'm gonna get into that much later. The Galaxian Symbol returns and will once again bring you to a maze segment. You don't need to find a corresponding door this time, you just grab it and you'll be warped right there. These are much better than they were in Pac-Man World 1. Originally they had these annoying obstacles that appeared in intervals, and they really didn't work that well with gameplay that involved navigating a maze while running from enemies. Those are totally gone this time, and it makes these mazes a lot more fair and much less frustrating to play. That said though, they're still just kinda, mazes. It's iconic, so I guess they feel the need to have these, but honestly, I'd rather just play the platforming sections. The level design is at least somewhat more interesting in this game. It's a little bit more open, you've got more space to freely maneuver around obstacles and a little bit more input on how exactly you're going to approach the stage. Being able to actually look around and examine your environment this time really helps with that. It's really nice that the camera is now fully controllable, but that doesn't mean the game isn't without its camera issues. There are segments that will still play with a locked camera, similar to the first game, but a lot of these segments will have platforms you need to land on slightly out of frame, so you can't see where you have to jump to. It was the biggest problem for me in the forest levels. I would have to jump on a tree branch, but I couldn't see the branch. This is never something you should ever have to do in a game. If you need to jump somewhere, you need to be able to see the platform, and when the camera locks in these segments, it does sometimes happen, and it shouldn't. It should never happen. That's probably the only jarring recurring issue I have. Otherwise, it's actually a fairly polished game. The controls are great and the presentation's pretty good too. Pac-Man is more expressive than ever, and yeah, I know I'm talking about a yellow sphere here. I'm sure he's not that hard to design for, but the animation still really brings this dude to life. Just look at that running animation. Boing, boing, boing. There's very subtle use of squash and stretch to give him a very bouncy feel, and that's something you're definitely gonna want for a round character that likes to pretend he's a basketball. And I really like how they actually animated his mouth when you get dots this time. It brings it closer to a proper Pac-Man feel, like you feel like you're gobbling these things up instead of just collecting them like coins in a Mario game. And the attention to detail on the ghosts is once again in full throttle. Once again, they've got different costumes for every different stage, but I also really like their running animation for when you get a power pellet. It's super silly and it's super great. The soundtrack's pretty good too. It's not like some bumpin' dope tunes like Miss Pac-Man Maze Madness had, but they're chill, it fills the void nicely, very fitting for a Pac-Man game. Though I do think they reuse the same note pattern a little bit too much, and I mean, I totally understand Lee motifing. Yes, I know that is an artistic thing when you have a common string of notes recurring throughout the music in a certain game or movie or whatever, but Pac-Man World 2 just uses it in every single song for that area, to the point where it just feels like all of these songs are the same song but with different instruments. I understand what they were going for. You ever see that thing with Mario 64 where every song in the game is actually the same one but elaborated out in this Beethoven-esque way? I'm not a music guy, so I couldn't explain it to you myself, but I feel like they were going for something like that, but they all just literally sound exactly the same, just played on different instruments. And maybe I'm only noticing it because I downloaded the soundtrack to use in this video, and I listened to them all back to back to back, and I was like, yeah, these are all the same song. I don't know if you would notice it as much just playing the game, but either way, I do really like the soundtrack. That's just a small gripe I noticed with it that I think they could have done a little bit better. Boss fights make a return, each one with one of the 4 ghosts. The first one is unique from the others, but the other 3 all kind of play the same but with added difficulty each time. They're all in the same robot thing and they have the same moves, it's just the stage you're fighting them on is what gets gradually harder to work with. The last one of the 4, oh my lord, the fight with Clyde. Oh, this guy can eat my ass because this little frickin' ghost is tough. I'm not talking like Anubis Rex levels of unfair and grading difficulty, but he did get a little bit on my nerves by the time I'd beaten him. This is not an isolated incident. There are going to be a number of times when the game will throw a difficulty spike at you. There's about 3 instances I can remember specifically. The third one is the boss fight I just mentioned, but the first one was during this ice stage. You gotta run from an avalanche, and of course that means running towards the camera, and of course that means means not being able to see where you're going. I kept dying from falling in pits that I just was not prepared for, and that's a problem because these pits just are not telegraphed properly. Okay, so I know a lot of people complain about segments where you're running towards the camera in games, but the truth is, there are ways to do this properly. So take Sonic Adventure 2 for example, and yes, I do believe this is a good example because the only thing you have to worry about is the truck, the thing the camera's looking at. Yeah, that's the only thing you need to think about. There's no pits, no obstacles, just a straight shot to the goal, don't get run over. There's rings as an optional collectible to give the stage some replay value if you know where they are on repeated playthroughs, but that's it. Everything you need to take into consideration is on screen at all times, and that's how it should be done. Here in Pac-Man World 2 though, you've got to worry about these pits, and the easy solution would probably be just to remove them, but unlike Sonic, who is running at a gratifyingly fast speed that's just entertaining in itself, Pac-Man is not like that. You need some extra input to make this section a little more interesting, so I don't really think that's the solution. Instead, I think what they needed to do is find a way to let the player know these pits are coming. The camera is already pulled back far enough, I feel, so I think all they really needed was some maybe objects on the playing field to alert the player about these pits. You know, like instead of having a sheet of ice that's going to make the player slide forward right into the pit beyond their control, I don't know, maybe have a sign or something, maybe have the level slope slightly to the left to subtly telegraph that there's going to be something you need to avoid here, something just to get the player at least know that they need to go to the left. I don't know, it's not something I think should be removed. I just think there are better ways to design something like this. And the other level that I found spiked in difficulty was Magma Opus. Good lord, this level can suck a fart out of my ass. And it's interesting because I hear a lot of people complaining about the lava levels, but it was just this one part that really got on my nerves. The level for the most part is absolutely fine. It's kind of lengthy, but it's fine. It's just at the very end, there's this dumb slide that's so freaking difficult to get to the bottom of without dying and dying and dying and dying. I plowed through all of my lives on this one part. And of course, getting a game over means you have to do the whole level over again, so I spend 15 minutes on getting back here, and you know what happens? I waste all of my lives here again. So I spend another 10 minutes rushing my ass to the end here, and I die, and I die, and I die. It's just this one part here is so difficult to get to the bottom. I don't understand it. Am I doing something wrong? Eventually I managed to get it, but it just seemed like total luck when I made that curve. I don't understand this. It's the only part of the entire game that has you rolling down a slide, and it just does not control well at all. I know I said Pac-Man didn't feel as heavy as before, and that for the most part is a very good thing for this game, but here, it feels the physics aren't heavy enough. It's so easy to fly off the side of this thing. I hate it. So, those are the 3 difficulty spikes, but there's one more part of the game I wasn't a huge fan of. It wasn't a frustrating or bad part, it just, I don't know, it didn't really click with me. I just didn't find it that fun. Yeah, it's the water levels. These levels run on a rail, with Pac-Man automatically swimming forward. All you gotta do is dodge stuff and pick up items, and it's okay, it just drags on. And then the next level is the exact same thing, and the next level is the same thing also, except you're in a submarine and you can fire missiles, but it's still pretty boring. So that's 3 levels in a row that all play like this. It's about half an hour that you spend playing these dull water levels. If you could just maybe half that time, or maybe cut it down by a third, it would be better. I don't know. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I think the game could do a little better, on a casual run anyway. Going straight through the game at my own pace, these were the only real things I had issues with. And mind you, it's really just one boss and a couple of levels out of like what, 20 something stages? I probably make these problems sound grander than they are because I'm focusing on what I think the game could do better, but that's just because I love this game so much and I really would love it to be the best it could. Otherwise, I think this is a really fun game. I think Pac-Man World 2 is at its best when you're climbing around large objects. I really love the tree levels. The ledge grab move is very responsive too, so it all works very well for this kind of thing. Looking around, seeing what trees you want to climb up, bouncing off the trampolines, it feels like you have the perfect amount of freedom for a linear stage in these kinds of levels, and I thought it was just super fun. I did have some ledge grabbing issues though. If you grab the ledge of a pillar that's falling over, it's impossible to climb up. You'll just loop the animation until you plummet into the lava with the pillar. So a pro tip for you, make sure you land on these because gripping the edge is not going to be an option. Like the previous Pac-Man World game, the final level is Halloween themed, this time in a swamp, like Ghosts Invaded Louisiana or something, I don't know. One of these levels really reminds me of the precipice from Rayman 2, having the boardwalks crumble as you race to the end. The last level will really test your navigation skills. It's very big and winding, you know, kinda like a maze, which makes sense for Pac-Man, come to think of it. I hear a lot of people have trouble playing this level, but I actually really enjoyed exploring around to figure out the right path. It felt fitting for a final Pac-Man level since Pac-Man was all about navigating mazes when he first debuted, so I think it works. After finishing the final level, we arrive at the final fight. With the 5 golden fruit in hand, Pac-Man finally confronts Spooky. The 5 golden fruit then transform Pac-Man into a golden Pac-Man who jumps forth to fight. Gold form doesn't even do anything. You still take and deal damage at the exact same rate, and you don't have any extra moves or anything. I don't even know what this was for. I was expecting something like Super Saiyan or Supersonic. You know, you get all of the mystical objects and they transform you into your ultra-powerful golden form, but it doesn't actually do anything for you. You just kind of dodge projectiles and kick him in the air until his health is all the way done. I don't know. I think the fight with Talkman was a better final battle, honestly, even if it did have that dumb insta-kill move that knocked you off the stage if you didn't know about it. Once Spooky is defeated, Pac-Man seals him back in the tree. Everyone then comes out to celebrate a job well done, a world now saved, and Pac-Man waves goodbye as the credits then play. Yeah, that was pretty good. I really enjoyed playing through that. A couple of issues I had with it here and there, but overall, I think this is a pretty great game. However, we have yet to recognize Pac-Man World 2's biggest weakness, and luckily it is something that can be totally avoided. It is something that does not have to be a part of your experience playing through this game, but it's a problem nonetheless, so it's definitely worth mentioning. Getting 100%. Alright, so there's a bunch of tokens you can collect in this game. There's 8 hidden in every level. By collecting these, you can unlock a bunch of classic Pac-Man games at the arcade, which is really cool that they made the arcade actually a physical building in Pac Village, hosted by this little cutie pie Sue. Yeah, she's got some purple doo-doo on her head, but she's still cute. She's got an apron, that's cool. I'm not weird. So what do we even got for games here? Oh yeah, like of course, the first one is just the original Pac-Man at 10 tokens, right? Then we got Pac Attack, that puzzle game at 30 tokens. Then we've got Pac-Mania, you know, the isometric version of Pac-Man at 100. And then the last one's just Miss Pac-Man, which requires a whopping 180 tokens. That's a weird choice if you ask me though, because A, we just had this in the previous Pac-Man adventure game. You could just play Miss Pac-Man in that, and B, Miss Pac-Man isn't even in Pac-Man World 2. If you ask me, they should have made the last one Pac-Man Jr. or Pac-Land or something. You know, one of the lesser known ones that people really would be more excited to be like, oh, what is this? You know, not just Miss Pac-Man, I don't know. There's 189 tokens in the game total, 8 hidden in every stage, but there's also 2 extra ones you can get as well. The first one's for completing a stage's time trial. This will task you with completing the level before the timer hits a certain point, but you can also collect items that'll freeze the timer for a couple of seconds each. It feels like a very natural progression of the time trial mode from Miss Pac-Man Maze Madness, and I think they did a good job with it. I did enjoy these. But the second token, you get that one for 100%ing the stage. That means collecting every single dot and every single fruit. This is downright nearly impossible for some stages though, and it's because you have to do it all on the same run. Can you imagine that slide segment that took me so many dang tries? Except every time you start over, you have to meticulously recollect every single fruit and dot in the level, and then make sure you don't miss a single one during that slide down, and if you do, you may as well just start the level over. I was getting so sick of finishing a level, and it's like, oh no, look at all the stuff you missed. It's like, come on, man, this is just a lot to do in a single run of the stage. This is a freaking nightmare. I can't imagine anyone in their right mind would ever want to 100% this game for fun. I only got 100 of the 189 tokens. I didn't even come close to unlocking Miss Pac-Man, forget that. And besides, I could just pop in Maze Madness if I really wanted to play it. You also get some concept art at 150, but it's not worth it. You don't get anything actually cool, like the blooper reel from the first game. Why didn't we get anything like that? Something like that feels genuinely rewarding, but for what you get here, oh, I would not bother with it. And this is really lame because a big part of what makes this game so much fun is exploring the levels, looking around the nooks and crannies, and finding those optional switches that would uncover hidden dots and fruits. That's part of what made the game so much fun to play. But what good is a collect-a-thon if you've got no real reason to collect? Well, I mean, like, you do have a reason to collect these things. You're going to want to unlock those dope arcade games, but it's going to quickly become something you will give up on. All they had to do to fix this was make it so all the fruit and dots you get on a level stay collected when you replay the level, so you only have to get the stuff that you didn't already collect. That would have easily fixed this. And that is Pac-Man World 2. I feel like they played it pretty safe yet again with this one. They did improve on a lot from the first game, the better graphics and controls and level design, yet I feel like they didn't really try anything even remotely ambitious with this title. Instead, they just kept all the exact same moves, didn't do a whole lot more with the level design. Instead, they just kinda polished what was already here from Pac-Man World 1. And you know, what it ended up being wasn't the most innovative platformer at the time, but it was still really good. I really enjoyed my playthrough of this game, even if there were a couple of things that frustrated me, and even if it didn't bring things to the next level. What I'd love to see them do next, though, is create a sequel that does bring things to the next level. Have big, ambitious, crazy level design using this already polished moveset. Maybe even create some brand new moves to fit Pac-Man, but it has to be stuff that's very befitting of his round design. You can't get too crazy, can't stray too far from what Pac-Man World is. Unfortunately, though, that's exactly what I hear Pac-Man World 3 does, but we're going to find out for ourselves. So I'll see you guys next time when we take a look at Pac-Man World 3. See you guys then.